Nicole, thank you so much for that grounding. I don't know about others, but I did feel my body and my spirit and just kind of a preparation for this time together. So I really appreciate what you just brought to this group.
Thank you.
Again, my name is Kimberly Malone. Welcome to the TPW New York's chapter meeting for September. Just for our help, can you do a little raise your hand emoji, or actually raise your hand if this is your first TPW New York meeting? Okay, I think there's some new folks in the room. For those of you who are new and those of you who are returning, this is an emerging coalition. This has been kind of in process and getting off the ground for about the last year, although we are standing on the shoulders of the California TPW, who has a longer history than us. And as we've been talking together on the support team, we've been really talking about how important it is to be grounded in our New York history. So many of you may be aware that this is the 50-year anniversary from the Attica Uprising. There has been some amazing reflections and just really amazing things that have come out of this time. I wanted to point your attention at last month, we had Kayla Johnson from the Alliance of Families for Justice highlighting that Attica is all of us. If you were not able to participate in either of those sessions, they're recorded, and I would really encourage you to go back and check out the conversations that were happening from those who were there and those who have deeply reflected on the impact of that for us now. What we wanted to do today is a little bit different. We really wanted to kind of give a TPW approach to this reflection of our history. We really wanted to create some time to ask ourselves the question of, like, what is the impact of those demands that were specifically articulated to our programs and to right now. And so Jill is going to put into the chat, if you are wanting to learn more about the Attica Uprising, some resources that we wanted to point you towards, particularly the short primer by Marambe Kaaba, who kind of really overviews what was happening at that time. So to start, Jose, if you could, I'm going to share my screen, and if you could read the beginning. So again, for context, 50 years ago at the Attica Prison, there was an uprising, and during that time, there was demands that were put together by those who were inside at that time. And this is how they start.
So would you like me to read this entire thing, Kimberly?
Yeah, if you can.
Okay, sure. We, the men of Attica Prison, have been committed to the New York State Department of Corrections by the people of society for the purpose of correcting what has been deemed as social errors in behavior. Errors which have classified us as socially unacceptable until reprogrammed with new values and more thorough understanding as to our values and responsibilities as members of the outside community. The Attica Prison Program and its structure and conditions have been enslaved on the pages of the manifesto of demands with the blood, sweat, and tears of the inmates of this prison. The program which we are submitted to under the facade of rehabilitation are relative to the ancient stupidity of pouring water on a drowning man, in as much as we are treated for our hostilities by our program administrators with their hostility as medication. In our efforts to comprehend on a feeling level an existence contrary to violence, we are confronted by our captors with what is fair and just. We are victimized by the exploitation and the denial of the celebrated due process of law. In our peaceful efforts to assemble in dissent, as provided under this nation's U.S. Constitution, we are in turn murdered, brutalized, and framed on various criminal charges because we seek the rights and privileges of all American people. In our efforts to intellectually expand in keeping with the outside world through all categories of news media, we are systematically restricted and punitively remanded to isolation status when we insist on our human rights to the wisdom of awareness.
Thank you, Jose. So this is how their document started. And then they went on to list 37 demands. And if you're unfamiliar with those demands or with that document, they are areas of focus were things like ending racial and political profiling, better working conditions, health and safety, advocacy and support, and family support. And those of you who are familiar with this document won't be surprised by this, but so many of them are really basic human rights. And they were asking and pleading for just being seen as humans. And so I wanted to shift it to Alejo, who really wants to describe how this impacts the work that in-prison programs are doing today.
Thank you, Kimberly. So one, I just couldn't help but just take a private second to myself. So I'm going to encourage all of us just to do the same collectively right now. Thank you. A lot of when we hear about Attica, its history, the things that led up to it, the things that occurred during the uprising, we often hear about the brutality. We hear about the conditions that people were lived in. We hear about how they were treated and executed. What often though is often overlooked is the contributions that were made or what extended as in the aftermath of Attica. A number of the men who did survive the uprising were transferred to different facilities. A number of those men, a high level of those men were sent to Greenhaven Correctional Facility, where they began to formalize and continue with the politicization of their issues as being incarcerated men. A think tank emerged from this. And I would like to acknowledge right now Miss Jacqueline McLeod, who's on this call with us, because her husband was one of the men who participated, Reverend Dr. Lonnie McLeod, who has passed away. So I want to acknowledge that. He, amongst others, Eddie Ellis, a lot of other famous names in prison advocacy coming from the individuals on the inside, was a part of this think tank. And from this think tank, a number of significant programs emerged, but not even so much as programs in its structure, but in the claim for a quality level of programs. As was mentioned in the description, they had rehabilitative programs in the 60s and 50s. However, they were just something pretty much, as what the man had said, pouring water on a drowning man. They were not qualitative programs. They were not programs that prepared individuals for their release. They were not programs that connected people with the community in any kind of meaningful way. They were not programs that supported agency of growth. They did not want to support any type of ways that would support people in prison to be vocal and express their concerns. From the Attica Uprising these programs have ranged everywhere between having what's now considered to be the inmate liaison committee, inmate grievance committee, what was first started as pre-release, because they had no transitional services back then. They had no pre-release back then. The men and the women in Bedford Hills created the first pre-release program that has now since become co-opted, if you would, from DOC's Correctional Services. So there were a number of influences that came out in the aftermath that was born from the minds and the hearts and awareness and sensibilities of men and women that were active in advocating for the human rights, and with intentionality towards working towards their freedom, and how to be, with a vision of how to return back to society in a healthy, if you would, holistic way. A lot of these demands, a lot of that thinking that came out of the think tank essentially formed what would be the mode of interaction with the programs that we are now representing. AVP is probably one of the most significant programs that came as a result of these type of think tanks. This was not created from someone on the outside that wanted to come in and say, oh, we got AVP, we want to do, and it wasn't created by docs. This was created in collaboration between men and the people from the American Friends Society, the Quakers group, to create a program to address alternatives to violence. This is what the men asked for. How to begin to address conflict resolve issues. So I say this, I want to just bring us to attention to the work that we're doing today. These programs, the idea, the pull, the desire, the push to want to have greater interaction with outside community was born out of advocacy, was born in the aftermath of an uprising. Right. Of course, we had to deal with an institution. So it was a matter, it was born out of there. The thoughts and the ideas was born out of these concepts, but the structures, how can we work together? The concern or the question I want to pose to us today, especially since all the things that's happened in the last, what we've identified with COVID, right? That docs is not being in communication with us like they should be. Like we're not in connection with people who are inside our communities and program members. Like there's total disconnect. It undermines everything that the think tank and that was born out in the aftermath of Attica. So much to the point that when people are not realizing where the avenue for programs in prison was born out of, thinking that maybe that docs in their great wisdom wanted to be treat people in prison like people. What I often seen from volunteers who want to go inside is there's this asking, if you would, almost a complacency, if you would. It's definitely not in the same mindset that was born in the aftermath and the think tanks of that in Attica, and that was born out of these think tanks. So I just wanted to just bring, there's so much to Attica that we can talk about the abuses, about the horrors, and all that is accurate. I do not want to diminish or gloss over any of that. But there's also part of the Attica experience, or that's carved into our history, that speaks directly to individuals like ourselves who want to go inside prisons to work with people in support of their transition and in support of society as a whole. So I guess, it's a rhetorical question, but the question is, when we think about Attica, when we think about the demands, when we think about all that they went through, how much of that did we see ourselves connected to? Thank you.
Thank you, Alejo. I took some time earlier to read through the demands. particularly with the lens of the work that we do as community-based organizations, as folks who are continuing to go inside. And I noticed that one of the demands says, we demand that there be one set of rules governing all prisons in the state instead of the present system where each warden makes rules for his institution as he or now she sees fit. And I read that and I couldn't help but think of how many of the conversations that really originally brought this group together were born out of the same challenges of different rules of different places for different programs for different people. And I also, as an update, 2 months ago, we were kind of gathering information from the group of what information we wanted to bring to docs as we introduced themselves to us. Last month, we updated that we had a few of us represented the group and had a meeting with docs. And since our last meeting, we received an email that said, while we admire the work that you're doing, we don't feel that there's value in the TPW as a liaison with docs, because so much of the information that comes out of our office is further enhanced at the facility level. So, you know, talking to you is going to get in the way of what the facilities are telling you, which is exactly and precisely what the problem is part of the challenge that we're experiencing. So, you know, just so you know, we will continue to communicate what we're doing with them, but we know that we really need to come together. And in the same way that there is kind of power in recognizing each other's experiences in this group, we really want to find workarounds and figure out how to do what we're trying to do well. I just wanted to take a moment to read the conclusion of what they wrote, and then we're going to spend some time in small groups. And I do recognize some of you may or may not be able to turn your voice on or be able to participate in those small groups, but feel free to listen in. So again, this is how they finished the manifesto. They said, "We are firm in our resolve and we demand as human beings the dignity and justice that is due to us by our right of birth. We do not know how the present system of brutality and dehumanization and injustice has been allowed to be perpetrated in this day of enlightenment, but we are the living proof of its existence and we cannot allow it to continue. The taxpayers who just happen to be our mothers, fathers, sisters, brothers, daughters, and sons should be made aware of how their tax dollars are being spent to deny their sons, brothers, fathers, and uncles of justice, equity, and dignity." So in your small groups, we'd love for you to, again, take a moment to pause and to think about some of the demands that were made so long ago, and to ask one another, 50 years later, do you feel like these words resonate with our current experience? Has there been progress? And if so, can we point that out to one another? And then also to reflect on in what ways does your prison program or the ones that you've been associated with, how are they about the business of bringing dignity and justice to the individuals that we're working with, and basically what do the demands mean today in informing and shaping the work that we do. So we will throw those questions in the prompt, but feel free to let the conversation go where it goes, and we'll call you back in about 15 or 20 minutes. Sound good?
Anika has her hand up.
Oh, Anika, go ahead.
I put in the chat too. I said, do we have, or I meant to say, do we have a connection with those survivors and are they on board as well? For those that do know them, because I have an uncle that was 23 at the time and he was incarcerated at the time of that uprising in Attica. So I'm just curious to know do others have a connection with those that might be comfortable enough that are also survivors, victims and survivors, you know, and are now warriors for and about the carceral system and against it.
Mhm.
I mean, that's my concern. I know whenever I hear someone speak on behalf of someone else, we always have to include those that were directly affected, even though those of us are family members, those of us that have friends, etc. Because that's why I put in the chat, we are Attica and Attica is us.
Yeah.
So especially, you know, not counting anybody else out, but especially those that are Black, Brown, Latino, Indigenous that have been unjustly incarcerated in this unjust carceral system. It's important to have those voices elevated. I don't like to ever do anything on behalf of anyone without including them
Absolutely.
and having them centered and elevated in that.
Sure. I'm curious to know if folks in the room have any direct connections. Some of the work that we highlighted in the chats were elevating. Oh, we have Jose. I'll let you go.
Well, I was just gonna say that I think you bring up an essential point, Anika, right? Like absolutely an idea that needs to be expressed every time we're in a conversation like this, right? But like the materials that Kimberly shared, it will allow you to access the voices of the people who are directly and were directly impacted. It's like there's so much material that is now becoming made available that there's no way we could really like any one of us could be an expert on it, but it's impacted us in many different ways. And the truth is the way that the state responded to Attica, the way that the society responded to the use of state violence against its own, as well as the incarcerated and all of that, leads to a direct impact on everyone that lives underneath this police-controlled nation. You know what I'm saying? So, but I think it would be awesome if somebody would take on the task of trying to reach out to some of those people who participated in the panels that they did on the 13th and the 9th, because there were some amazing voices in that room. And if somebody could convince them of the good that they can do by sharing that here, like that would be awesome, you know. And Anika, I think you could do it too, just saying.
As though I don't do enough, but okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot like that. I just recognize that you have a powerful and important voice that people will get behind, that's all.
No, it's okay. I'm right here with you though, because I was thinking while you were talking, so you good?
You know, Anika, I so support, I so appreciate you saying that. And that's something that I personally feel that oftentimes when we do not have enough, I don't see enough. I know there's at least 3 to 4 of individuals on this call right now that's directly impacted. There may be more. And I still feel that's not enough, right? And so I personally feel that, you know, a little sense of failure, right? That we got to get better in this way, you know? So I definitely support that. I just want to also add though, and I so appreciate you saying that we are Attica and Attica is us, right? All of us or none of us. And like, what does that really mean? Really? You know, it's easy to say, but what does that really mean? So, you know, I was in a conversation one time when people was talking about I was in Attica. I was in Attica during the uprising. I was in Attica during the 80s, approximately 10 years after the uprising. And they were making reference to how racist Attica was, how brutal Attica was, how compared to every other prison, Attica was the worst of the worst. Like, this is so racist. And I'm listening to this and I lived it and I'm saying, yeah, but you know, after living in a society with failing schools, high violence in the community, failing healthcare, like minimal chances, by the time I got to Attica, it didn't seem unusual. The racism in Attica was just a reflection of what I've experienced my whole life. So I want to share that as a thought to think about when we say Attica is us and we are Attica, that Attica is in the community. It might be a lot, you know, there were times that people that said apartheid, the American apartheid, was a little bit less brutal than the one that was in South Africa, but it's just as impactful on the spirit. In many communities in the country, in New York City and around the state and around threat of incarceration.
Oh, Alejo, we're losing your audio a little bit.
If you turn your camera off, it might buffer it out.
I mean now? No, yeah.
All right,
little.
all right. Keep going, Alejo.
So no, I was just saying that even with people who have never been to prison, from certain neighborhoods in New York City, in our state, around the country, some marginalized, impoverished communities, even with ever having to go to prison, they still have been impacted by that same sense of incarceration and imprisonment in society. So when we start talking about Attica is us and we are Attica, it's broader than just simply saying, oh, the people who get locked up. It's a direct correlation to community.
That's right. That's right. I'm really appreciating this conversation, and this is precisely the space that we want to create to continue the conversation in small groups. And so I'm going to have Jill break us out into smaller groups so that we can add our voices into this conversation and really learn from one another. And we'll be in breakout groups for probably about, like I said, maybe now 10 or 15 minutes. We'll give you a call back.
In other meetings, but we are undergoing our onboarding for new members. As Kimberly said, we are a new coalition. So we invite everybody to these meetings, but as a member, you get access to the Slack as well and a specific listserv. So just as a reminder, we do have a Google form that you can fill out if you're associated with a program, and you can fill out that Google form. We will contact you, we'll send you a welcome email, and then Jill and Carolyn will reach out to schedule an onboarding call. If you are an individual, a family member, someone who is formerly incarcerated yourself and still wants to participate, we really welcome that. We want you here. So if you're not necessarily associated with a program, you can just email us as well. I'm sure you've been getting the emails from the TPW, and just say you want to be onboarded, you want to learn more, and we'll get you on the Slack, and we'll have a welcome and intro call with you all. On the Slack, just for those of you who are already on that, we have a member intro channel, and it's just a place for everybody to, as it says, introduce yourself, tell everybody a little bit about themselves, their programs if they're associated with one. And then we have several different channels for different things. Announcements, you have an event coming up, you want somebody to know about a really great resource. So the Slack is really just a place for us to communicate in between these monthly meetings. That's all I got.
Thanks, Jeanette.
How do we get the Google form?
Yes, I don't know, Jill, if you can include the link here. If not, I will send it as a follow-up to this call as well. There'll be a follow-up email that will go out, and the Google form link will be in there too.
Oh, okay, thank you.
And you guys see your hand raised?
I put in the chat, I was just saying, because I know it came up in our group that, how do people get involved? And I was just giving them some things, some ways to get involved. There's several bills out there, look them up, get involved with CCA. I know downstate has NYCC. I mean, there's so many different orgs, and just getting that knowledge and getting connected really helps, because like I said, everyone's affected. Even if you feel it's not your community, you're affected with your tax dollars. You're affected as you see families broken up, loss of jobs. I mean, there's so many things. Like, people are saying, oh, we don't have any employees. Guess what? Take off the box or whatever. Stop hindering somebody from a stolen car just to go ahead and flip pizzas in your pizza shop and give them a job. You know what I mean? Something that's like I said, everyone's affected in some way because we're all connected. Doesn't matter your race, culture, religion, gender identification. We're all connected, whether we see it or not, or want to accept that.
Yes, Thank you. Are there any other announcements from the group of things that you want to, upcoming programs or events or things that you want coming up? Okay. If that's the case, our next general meeting is, we've been meeting regularly on the third Thursday of the month at 3 o'clock. So we're trying to keep it simple. Third Thursday at 3. So our next meeting is October 21st at 3 p.m. We would love to see you there, and feel free to bring your friends. And one just last point, again, something that we've been talking about is how our impression is that in California, there doesn't seem to be as many hurdles to get folks who have participated in programs inside into leadership positions after they come out. And so we are really curious to hear your experience of that in your programs. Do you have folks who are going back inside? And how can we advocate to, if we need to change the rules or the laws to make sure that that can happen, how do we do that is something that we've been thinking about. So something for you to think about too. And thank you so much everyone for coming. Thanks for coming.